Goeiedag, mijn naam is Evan, ik ben immigratie-procureur here in America, and ik wil you help om immigratiewet te verstaan. Now, I'm kind of doing this video as a request for information from a lot of y'all, and I don't know if there's anything that I can even do about it, but it is a bit concerning, and I believe Colonel Wyatt has covered it, so you can go check out his channel if he has. Again, I took off for a couple of weeks, so I'm not sure what has or has not been discussed, but a lot of y'all have reached out to me because, as you are aware, the U.S. Embassy's website inside Africa and asylum and refugee law, again, we're specifically talking about refugees in this video, but you know that I use them interchangeably because the law is the same for both, fear of persecution, all of that. But that people in the refugee program, as they've gone through the initial screenings with the group CWS, and I haven't heard from anyone else, only CWS here, but this is kind of why I'm reaching out to try and gather some information, that many people have been not necessarily denied, but the interviewer has seemingly not cared or told the interviewee, the person being interviewed, the Afrikaners seeking refugee status here, that they're not interested in the well-founded fear of future persecution, that they were only asking about past persecution. And if the individual said they don't have past persecution, only have the well-founded fear, that the interviewer seemed not interested and they have not received a follow-up. Well, as you know, and it is clear from both the U.S. Embassy's website and from refugee law, that past persecution is not required for you to be a refugee, or in the case of those of the United States, for you to be an asylee. Now again, I'm going to not talk about asylum seekers for the rest of this video for a second, because this is specifically for people who are applying for the refugee program, because remember, the burden is different for asylum seekers. Past persecution gives individuals a rebuttable presumption of a well-founded fear of future persecution. That's why they ask about it, right? The goal is really to prove the well-founded fear of future persecution. That's why this is so bizarre to me. There is no requirement to have suffered persecution in the past. The reason that the refugee program asks about that is because under the U.S. refugee law, what we've adopted is refugee law, and again, the same terminology is used for asylum seekers, that if you have suffered past persecution, you get a rebuttable presumption of a well-founded fear of future persecution, meaning the government can then step in and say, yes, you suffered persecution. It meets the three elements. By the government, there's someone the government is unable and willing to control. It rises to the level of persecution and because of an immutable characteristic. But let's say that the government that was persecuting you has changed. There was a revolution. They are no longer a threat. That is why they say that presumption is rebuttable. So that's why they ask, if you've suffered it in the past due to an immutable characteristic, then our government automatically assumes, unless there is rebuttable evidence or proof, that you automatically have a well-founded fear of future persecution because it makes sense. But it's still pointing towards the future persecution. Because if those elements have been removed and there's no future persecution, then you're not a refugee or you're not an asylee in the United States. So the end goal in the refugee program really is to prove or to articulate that well-founded fear of future persecution. Again, I'm getting kind of into like the background of it here, what will be discussed in the creation of a refugee program for a particular group, but it's important that you know so you understand why this doesn't make sense. So if one of the screeners for CWS is not letting you talk about future persecution, the well-founded fear, and they're only looking at past persecution, then they don't understand refugee law. They don't understand the program, because that doesn't make any sense. Because all past persecution does is prove the reasonableness of future persecution. And you don't have to have past persecution to have the well-founded fear of future persecution. So if this has happened to you, please let me know in the comments. If it's another group than CWS, please let me know in the comments. Be specific, unless you can't, right? Unless there's something that's preventing you from doing so. But I'd like to know, because I would like to reach out. And again, I don't have connections. I'm simply a law professor and an attorney. But whether that's my local congressman or my state senator or someone, or even just to USCIS through the contact numbers that I have, which of course, let's be realistic, we'll get nowhere, right? I don't want to, give anyone false hope, but I don't have connections like that. But I would like to see and hear from you if you have been, or if it seems like if you've been openly not referred, if they've told you we were not referring you because you don't have past persecution, I definitely need to know that. You got to tell me. If they told you on the phone they're not going to accept future persecution, I need to know that, because that clearly goes against the requirements of the program and everything we know about refugee and asylum law. So I need to know that as well. Again, only what you're comfortable sharing with me, but that gives me some ammunition to bark up certain trees and see what I can find out, because that doesn't make sense, right? If it was just about past persecution, what if the conditions in the country have changed? Then there is no reason for a refugee program, right? That's why this doesn't make sense. Logically, it doesn't make sense. If all they cared about was past persecution, well, what if that government was elected out, or the government was overthrown, or the people persecuting you, the South African government has come out and stamped down and cracked down on all persecution of Afrikaners and other ethnic minorities? There wouldn't be a purpose for a refugee program. None of this makes sense. The future persecution, the fear of it, is what fuels refugee programs and asylum seekers. The past persecution, being able to prove it, just gives you that proof that it's reasonable that I still have that fear if those conditions are still there. So hopefully this makes sense to people, and I'm reaching out. This is step one of me trying to figure out what's going on, or at least get a handle of it from my end. So I would appreciate if you would put in the comments if this has happened to you and what your situation has been, especially if they seemed not interested in the fear of future persecution, or if they straight up just told you, we're not collecting data on future persecution. This has not happened from USCIS. I'm confident because that they understand the law that doesn't make any sense. The whole point is future persecution. But if that has happened in USCIS and you're willing to share, please tell me. I'm confident it hasn't. That would undermine the entire system. I think this is just coming from CWS and that organization, who are the initial screeners. And of course, can they refuse to refer you? Sure, of course they can. That's why this is important to try and gather all this data. So let me know in the comments. I appreciate it. Remember to like, subscribe, share, and I'll see you for the next video.